Hey there, we call me Grace. Though life throws some curveballs our way, I am simply your normal woman. I suppose I ought to start right now. Jack met me in high school. Quiet in class, he kept to himself most of the time. The first movement was made by me. Hey Jack, got a minute? One day following class, I asked him. That is the starting point for everything. We were the usual high school sweethearts, prom night, first kiss under the stars, all that kind of thing. From the moment I arrived, Mr. and Mrs. Dawson loved me. Grace, you're just the kind of girl we hoped Jack would find, Mrs. Dawson would say, like a member of their family. My little sister Lily was the only one not quite excited. Though we never truly got along, she is 4 years my junior. I recall seeing her staring at Jack with this unsure glance in her eyes. But I dismissed it, sisters, right? Jack and I tied the knot at 23. Just out of college, I began working as an economist. Jack hired himself as a security guard. Not much, but we were happy, or so I thought. After 1 year of marriage, Alex and Ben, our twins, were born. Initially, Jack was over the moon. He exclaimed, clutching them in the hospital, "We're a real family now, Grace." That delight, though, did not last. He occasionally not at all, but began arriving home late. "Where have you been? Try to keep your voice steady," I would ask. "Out," he would snap back, avoiding my eye. Living with a stranger was like that. Then arrived the battle that turned everything around. The twins would not stop wailing. Money was limited. Could you not have them stop? Jack screamed one night. "Jack, I am doing my best here. They are your children as well." I turned around and fired back. That evening, he hurried out of the house. Jack and all he owned vanished the next morning. Over and over I called him, but no answer. I phoned my folks in a frenzy. "Has Jack gotten back to you?" I asked, voice shaking. The cue stopped for a moment. "Grace, darling, honey, Lily's also gone," my dad said at last. My pulse dropped. Not possible, but deep inside I knew. Betrayed by my sister and husband, I turned to Jack's folks and my parents at that time. Each was everything I had left. Mr. Dawson said, his voice weighted with disappointment, "We're here for you, Grace." I applied for divorce. Jack or Lily nowhere to be seen. Alone with 2 boys to raise a broken heart, I was resolved to keep on for my babies. Living without Jack was like negotiating a never-ending storm. Me with my twin boys, Alex and Ben, just trying to keep our heads above water. One evening, the lads were nonstop crying. I was close to my wits. Mom answered that when she called. "Grace, how are you holding up?" Her voice full of anxiety, she questioned. "Mom, it's difficult. The lads refuse to sleep. I conceded, worn out, and felt tears starting to flow. "Listen, honey, you are not by yourself in this. Okay, we are here for you," Mom said forcefully, not forgetting that. That was Mom, always the rock in our family. Jack's dad, Mr. Dawson, came next. One day he came over merely to follow up. "Grace, you should be aware that Jack makes us equally unhappy." Sitting on our worn-out couch, gazing around the little flat I could barely afford, he murmured, "You're still family to us." I nodded without trusting my voice. Mr. Dawson always managed to make me feel as though I was not a complete failure. Actually, though, money was limited, real tight. I recall feeling as though I was drowning while sorting the bills. How am I going to approach this? I said to myself in whispers. One weekend, my dad dropped by to volunteer. On the kitchen table, he observed the pile of bills. "Grace, you realize we can assist you with this, right?" he said, anxiety wrinkling his brow. "I understand, Dad, simply. I want to work on this alone." "I have to," I said, trying to project more assurance than I did. I got into a pattern as the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months. It was difficult, that much is true, but I knew I had to keep on every time I glanced at Alex and Ben with their large knave eyes. They were my universe today, my everything. One day, following a particularly bad night, I left the lads off to my parents' house for many hours. I simply needed some time to inhale. I watched other families, kids running around, laughing, parents watching over them, smiles on their faces while seated in the park. It struck me then how dramatically my life had changed, the extent of my loss. Then I considered what I still had, my boys, my family, a fighting attitude. I got up, cleaned away the tears, and headed back to my parents' house. I was Grace, single mother of 2 amazing boys, and I was going to make it come hell or high water. I was clinging on, trying not to fall off, as life was a roller coaster. Then one day, Jack's dad, Mr. Dawson, dropped over with an offer that might make all the difference. "Grace, I have been thinking," he said, appearing a little awkward in our small living room. "I have about $100,000 in savings. I should give it to the lads." For a moment I stood mute. "That's Mr. Dawson. That's a lot of money, but I can't simply grab it," I said, overwhelmed. He waved a hand with contempt. "For the future of my grandsons, Grace, not coupled with strings." Though an idea was developing in my head, his kindness was moving. "Mr. Dawson, suppose we started a business with that money, something that will provide every one of us a consistent salary." He squinted. "What type of business?" "A pastry shop," I said, the concept blossoming in my head. "Your wife is a truly outstanding baker. Think back on those cakes she created for the church bake sales." Mr. Dawson burst out laughing. "Yeah, she always had a knack for baking, but she's been out of that game for a long time." Feeling a flash of enthusiasm, I said, "Well, maybe it's time for her to get back in." Talking to Mrs. Dawson came next. The next day I walked over to their place. Sitting in her little kitchen, I said, "Anne, I have a proposal for you. Starting a pastry shop would make you what? George can oversee the front end. You bake. I handle the financing." Anne looked startled. "Me, then? Once more, a pastry chef is, oh, Grace, you're not sure. It's been years. You still get it, Anne." I know that, so I urged her, hoping she would see the possibilities. Anne warmed to the idea after some persuasion. "Well, it has always been a dream of mine," she said, smiling. Over the next few weeks, we worked on the specifics and discovered a small location downtown ideal for the store. Each of us works, painting, decorating, organizing everything. Opening day turned into a swirl. Behind the counter, I watched as customers came in, attracted by the aroma of fresh pastries and Anne's reputation. "Grace, we are really doing it," Anne exclaimed, pausing momentarily from the kitchen, her face flushed with enthusiasm. I grinned, relishing a pride I hadn't felt in a long time. "We certainly are, Anne. We certainly are." It was more than simply a company. It was a fresh start, an opportunity to create something of my own. And I prepared for it. Sweet Beginnings, the pastry shop, was more than just a brand new endeavor. It came to be our planet. Though demanding, the early mornings, the nonstop baking, the hum of the oven, it was thrilling. In the kitchen, Anne was in her element. "Grace, I must have more sugar." Her voice muffled by the whirl of the mixer, she would shout out. I would hurry to the storage with a hefty bag of sugar. I would tease, dumping the sack with a thump, "Here you go, Chef Anne." The charm on the counter was George, Mr. Dawson. He would tell the patrons, who ate every word, "You must try our apple pie, best in town." He was naturally good in making everyone unique. From morning to evening, the shop was humming. Though they stayed for the friendliness, people came for the pastries. We started showing up often in the neighborhood. Regulars would drop by for a talk as much as a meal. One of our frequent visitors, Mrs. Jenkins, asked me one hectic day, "Grace, how do you manage all this?" "It's a lot," I remarked, "but I have a great staff." I waved to Anne and George, who were laughing over a batch of burned cookies. Still, things were not all perfect sailing. There were days when a fresh recipe proved disastrous, or when the dough simply would not rise. Anne would respond, back to the drawing board, unconcerned by the setback. We met our first major crisis one day. Midway through a large order, the oven broke down. What are we meant to do? With flour on her hands, Anne fretted. I drew in a long breath. We will sort it out, Anne. We always behave. And we certainly did. Working through the evening, we borrowed the oven from the bakery down the street. The delivery of the order was on schedule, therefore strengthening our reputation for dependability. Months later, Sweet Beginnings became somewhat well known. We had to bring in additional assistants. Hired, too, a lanky youngster named Tom and a shy girl named Sarah. After interviewing several of the local children, though anxious to learn, they were green. Keep a check on the cupcakes, Sarah. They burn easily, Anne said, showing her the ropes. Originally assigned housekeeping tasks, Tom quickly developed a strong passion for baking. One day, his eyes brilliant with inquiry, he inquired, "Can I try making the dough?" "Why not?" Anne handed Tom the apron and said, "Let's see what you have." Numbers, instructions, and staff administration dominated my days. Though I seldom had time to sit down, when I did I would see the life we had created, the patrons savoring their goodies, the laughter from the kitchen, the feeling of togetherness. At times, it was quite taxing. Regular visits came from my folks. One day, my dad remarked, "You've turned this place around, Grace," looking about proudly. "Not just me, Dad. It's not just you. It is all of us," I said with teen pride. We set aside something unique, a large sale, free samples, the works, as the first anniversary of Sweet Beginnings drew near. The store was crowded with people waiting at the door. George muttered, wiping his brow as he attended another customer, "Can't believe it's been a year. We were painting these walls just yesterday," Anne said, pausing rarely from the kitchen. Exhausted but content, we sat down that evening following the departure of the final customer and the cleaning of the business. To 1 year of Sweet Beginnings and many more to come, I toasted and raised my coffee cup. To family, George said, his voice vibrantly emotional. Anne grinned and said, "To dreams." Our cups clinked, the sound filling the vacant store. Not only as my in-laws, but also as my partner's supporters, family, Anne and George were. At the pastry store, life was running just perfectly. We set up additional branches in surrounding cities. Though challenging, we once more managed. One day then, out of the blue, my past chose to resurface. Looking at the social media page of the shop, I came onto a message request. That came from my sister Lily. My pulse skipped a beat. Since she fled with Jack, I hadn't heard from her. Read the message, "Living the dream with your ex, sis," then a picture of her and Jack reclining on some foreign beach. I was both incredulous and angry. "Why now?" I said to myself in whispers. I tried to ignore it, but she kept texting more, each one a slap in the face. "Look at Grace, dear. This might have been you, but you were too busy running shopkeeper." Another message taunted. I was simmering inside. I phoned Mom during my break. Trying to keep my voice steady, "You won't believe who's messaged me," I said. "Lily," Mom guessed with a tired voice. "What does she want right now?" "Just rubbing her fancy life in my face," I said as I looked through Lily's texts loaded with images of her and Jack. "Grace, don't let her reach you. Mom counseled, she's just trying to irritate you." She was right, but it was difficult to swallow. I mentioned it to George that evening. "Can you find it unbelievable? She has the nerve to show her life with Jack after all these years," I added, clearly frustrated in voice. George nodded his head. "Some individuals never change. Simply ignore her, Grace. But it was simpler said than done to ignore her. Every fresh communication Lily sent was like a thorn pricking me. Pictures of opulent dinners, luxurious hotels, constant boasting. It was too much. I broke through one day at last. "Lily, what do you want for? Why are you carrying on like this?" My fingers quivering with rage, I typed back. She answered rapidly. "Just pointing out what you are losing out on. Grace, there is still time to join the enjoyable side of life." My head whirling, I fixed my gaze on the screen. Come meet her, after all she had accomplished? No thanks. Right here I have everything I need, so I typed back, trying to project more confidence than I felt. She emailed a laughing emoji in reply. "Choose yourself. Have fun running your small bakery." I closed her. It seemed as though the only way to stop her poison from permeating my life. Still, her comments stayed in my head long after I blocked her. I looked about the shop, at the patrons savoring our delicacies, at my staff working nonstop, at the life I had created. Lily could maintain her apparently glitzy life. I took great pride in something authentic. Her comments, however, tasted bad. It was a sobering reminder that the past finds a way to come up with you no matter how far you go. Simply said, I hoped it wouldn't catch up anymore. Lily's message's sting of treachery stayed in my head. Though I knew I had to act, I was not sure what. At that point, George, my father-in-law, suggested a scheme that seemed nearly too audacious. I let the truth flow regarding Lily's messages as we sat in the rear of the pastry store. George listened, his expression tinged with both worry and resentment. His voice sharp. "Grace, we cannot let them get away with this. We have to impart knowledge to them." Though wary, I found great interest. "What do you have in mind?" George had mischievous glows in his eyes. "A bogus will. We lead children to believe they have a great inheritance." Though part of me was yearning some kind of retaliation, it was a brave idea. "You consider it to be working?" I inquired. "I am quite clear of it. Greed can drive individuals to act stupidly," he said boldly. I inhaled deeply and sent Lily a well-written note. "Learned about George's updated will. Looks like Jack and you might have an unexpected visit." Lily responded with quickness and consistency. "What sort of surprise would this be? Ask me more." I participated, giving her just enough to keep her engaged. "Not very clear. If you wish not to miss anything, you should return." Jack then made a call. Once so familiar, his voice sounded far off and chilly. "Grace, what is this about a will?" he asked succinctly. Hearing him after all these years set off a range of feelings, but I remained cool-headed. "You heard correctly. George is weighing his choices," I remarked casually. Jack's curiosity grew. "And then what about us? What are we expected to get?" His voice had shockingly sharp, direct greed. Not one word on our sons, his own children. It all came down to what he might win. Keeping my tone objective, I said, "You'll have to come back and see." "We'll be there," he responded, then suddenly cut off the conversation. I hung with a beating heart. The scheme was underway, and there was no turning back. I left George filled in on the chat. "They took the bait," I remarked, sounding a mix of excitement and trepidation. George nodded, a fierce look on his face. "Let's see how far they are ready to go for greed." I couldn't get the worry away during the next 3 days. Should the scheme fail, what then? Suppose it made things worse? George, meanwhile, stayed cool under pressure. "Grace, trust the strategy. He told me we are in control." Rumors abound in the shop as the day of their return drew near. Ignorant of Lily and Jack's actual motivations, our team speculated widely. "Maybe they're returning for good," one of our staff members, Sarah, said. Another worker, Tom, said, "Or maybe they're here to cause more trouble." Though I attempted to concentrate on my work, my mind kept straying towards the approaching showdown. Lily was back in town, flaunting her extravagant way of life right in front of me. "See all I have purchased, Grace. Our life has been nice." She waved her fancy bag, gloating. Attempted to retain my cool. "Wonderful to hear it, Lily." She laughed. "Of course, you wouldn't grasp. You are only a basic accountant." Her comments cut like a razor. She knew not the whole truth, but I back off from answering. "Lily, I find great satisfaction with my existence. For me, that is plenty." She scoffed. "Grace, you were always really dull. Not surprisingly, Jack left you for me." Jack's father, George, intervened before I could answer. "Lily, that's plenty. Let us discuss the reason you are truly here." Jack, who had remained silent until lately, said now, "Indeed, on the will, we are entitled to our part, right?" George fixed each of them, a tough look on his face. "Actually, you should know about the confectionery company." Jack and Lily leaned in keen. George started, his voice firm. "The confectionery and its branches in other cities, they don't belong to me." Their eyes went wide in perplexity. "They belong to Grace," he went on. "Her is the actual owner. I simply listed as the head." Lily's once stiff face became startled. Jack's jaw stayed wide, unable to digest the information. "You are rich?" Jack stammered, his eyes flying between George and myself. I nodded. A wave of delight coursed over me. "She is indeed." Lily was mute. Her prior haughtiness vanished. "And there is more," George said. "I have decided to give my grandchildren, Grace's boys, all of my property." Lily then let out a scream. "What? You cannot treat us this. We need money to settle these horrible debts." "Lily, shut down," Jack urged her. I nodded. "Jack, don't worry. I'm familiar with everything. Your apparent luxury is really loans, additional loans." The last punch arrived. Lily and Jack looked completely disheartened. Their hopes for a windfall collapsed. I stared at them, conflicted in sympathy and triumph. Coming back for money, they discovered their avarice had brought them nothing. Lily and Jack left the store looking shocked and defeated, and I could not help but feel both satisfaction and relief. George gave me a back pat. "You managed that rather well, Grace." I sighed and looked at the door they had just left, wishing it never had to come to this. George laughed and added, "Well, sometimes life throws you lemons, and you made the best lemonade out of it." One of our staff members, Sarah, approached us just then. "Is all good, Grace?" There was some disturbance. I turned to her and grinned. "Everything is good, Sarah. Just some ancient business at last finding equilibrium." She nodded, still looking a little worried, then returned to work. The remainder of the day passed blurringly. Though I was occupied with the shop, my mind kept returning to the meeting with Lily and Jack. It was over. Finally. My phone buzzed that evening as I was closing down. Lily's text was what I found here. "You hadn't seen the last of us," it said. Feeling a flash of wrath, I fixated on the screen, but I inhaled deeply, then typed back, "Go forward, Lily. I am." Blocked her number, feeling a sense of finality. It was time to let go of the past and turn ahead. Walking home, I considered my path from the pain and betrayal to creating a profitable company and speaking out for myself. Though I had come out stronger, it had not been simple. My lads, Alex and Ben, were playing in the living room when I got home. Their cheeks shining, they came up to me. "Mommy, you are home." Feeling a great sense of love and protection for them, I gave them close hugs. "Yes, and I'm not going anywhere," I said softly. I knew then, as I put them into bed, this was my real wealth, my family, my children, my fortitude. That evening I smiled as I headed to bed. I had conquered my most intense anxiety. I was no more Grace, the deceived wife, or Grace, the ordinary accountant. Grace here was the survivor, the fighter, the winner. And this was only starting point.